So here's our agenda. We're going to have a brief introduction to the course, which is about unconscious and implicit bias. We'll address microaggressions, the impact of unconscious bias, how to address unconscious bias, and then finally promoting inclusivity. Next. So the way I'd like to start this session, and this is, I'm going to ask 8 questions, and the answers to the questions are just for you. This is an opportunity for you to consider some questions honestly, which will hopefully help you determine whether you have any kind, well, we all have unconscious biases, but can help you to sort of understand what kind you might have. When I tell people that I teach an unconscious bias course, invariably I get people who say, oh, I don't have any unconscious biases. And the matter of fact is that's not the fact. We all do in various ways and forms. And these 8 questions are just to sort of open our minds up so we can have some group awareness before we get into the conversation about unconscious bias. So again, answers are just for you, and just answer in your mind as honestly as you can be with yourself. So first question, how often do you specify someone's race when it is not necessarily relevant? For instance, you say a Black doctor or a Latina lawyer or a white lawyer. Question 2, have you ever assumed that someone is good or bad at an activity like athletics, academics, driving, or cooking because of his or her or their race? Number 3, have you ever asked a person, quote, where are you really from? Number 4, have you ever joked around and told a guy to, quote, stop acting like a girl, close quote? Number 5, when you've seen a person who has a physical or mental disability, have you ever avoided making eye contact? Number 6, have you ever assumed your female coworker's spouse is a man? Number 7, have you ever assumed an older adult isn't as competent with technology or social media? And finally,
as long as they're not me.
Right. And finally, number 8, have you ever avoided sitting next to someone or making eye contact with them because of their body weight? So I think that those are 8 good questions to sort of get the mind percolating about different kinds of biases that we might have that we're unaware of. If anyone had any comments or questions about the questions, please feel free to ask, or we could discuss. If not, Zoe, next slide. So this is just a bubble looking at the different kinds of words that we associate with unconscious bias. Again, sort of opening our minds to the concept, racism, racial injustice, disproportionality, covert bias, disadvantage, microaggression. Let's see, the implicit association test, and we'll talk about that later, disadvantage. But just give you some idea that there are all these words that sort of swirl around this concept of unconscious bias, and hopefully we'll sort of get them a little more focus on them and talk about some of them in more detail. Next, please, Zoe. So what we'd like to do is first just take a look at how the brain works. This is very simplistic, but the idea is just for us to understand how unconscious bias works in our brains. We arguably have just 2 systems that are functioning in our brains. We have system 1, which is our first reactions, which is 95% of how we react, which is unconscious. And then we have system 2, which is really the thinking part of our brain. which is 5%, which is the conscious part of our brain function. And when we're looking at the system one, it's really, we come into a situation and it can be any kind of situation. The reaction is automatic. It's fast, it's reactive, based on past experience and successes, impulsive, and it can be error prone. But that's how we come in and we assess where we are, we assess who's around, we take a look at our situation and circumstances without even thinking about it. It's absolutely unconscious, 95%. And then we have the 5% of our brain, which is the more thinking part, which is the reflective, slow, it takes effort, deliberate self-control. It involves complex thinking, is goal-oriented, and is rational. And that's the conscious part of our brain that's operating, but that's only 5% of how we're thinking. So when we're talking about this unconscious bias, it's in that system one, fast and reactive and error prone. Next slide. So what is this unconscious or implicit bias? It's bias that we are not aware of. And I know that's sort of stating the obvious, but it's important to keep that in the forefront of our minds, because we have to have other people point it out to us. It's literally something we are not aware of. And so we have to have others bring it to our attention. Number two, it's a preference or an aversion that we are not aware of. And finally, implicit bias, just this definition, is this unconscious forms of discrimination and stereotyping. And I want to highlight the word stereotyping. We'll talk about that in a minute, based on race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, ability, age, etc. All different kinds of elements that in my diversity and inclusion world constitute diversity. So we're not aware a preference or aversion, and just unconscious forms of discrimination and stereotyping. Next slide. So here it is, just said again, unconscious / implicit versus explicit bias. Implicit, unconscious attribution of particular qualities to a member of a social group. Implicit stereotypes shaped by experience and based on learned associations. Conscious, explicit bias, attitudes and beliefs that we have about a person or group on the conscious level. Most of the time, these biases and their expression arise as the direct result of a perceived threat. Now, I do want to, I haven't done this before, but I want to bring a real life story into this part of the program. I don't know, this was a while ago. I feel like at this point, it was a couple of years ago, but there was an incident at the Starbucks in Center City in Philadelphia. And I see some heads nodding if you recall that. So we had a manager of the Starbucks, a white woman. We had two African-American men who were waiting for a third white man, it happens. They didn't buy anything. They wanted to use the restroom. Manager said to them, "You can't use it." It turned into a brouhaha. The cops were called. The two African-American gentlemen were arrested, and Starbucks had a huge incident on its hands for a whole bunch of different reasons. But what Starbucks did in response to this occurrence was close all of its stores down to have an afternoon of unconscious bias training. And I remember thinking, not a bad idea to have this unconscious bias training, but was that incident unconscious bias or was that explicit bias? And the presumption was it was unconscious, and I don't know, but I think the question deserved like a little examination before they just chalked it up to unconscious bias and left it at that. I wonder whether this manager just saw these two guys in the midst of her store, which is in, Tony Rittenhouse Square, and had an issue with them because of their race. I don't know, but the idea is that it's not necessarily so simple, unconscious versus conscious in terms of assessing which it is, but those are the two kinds of biases that we're talking about. Next slide. So what are the types of unconscious bias? And so if you can just click through, and I think the way these come up is one will come up, they're all up. Okay. I'm just going to go through these, and if you can be mindful of these types and perhaps ways that they relate to you and your thinking. And if at the end of this discussion or my presentation about the types of people would like to have a discussion about their experience with these biases, that would be great. So unconscious bias, affinity. When I do this presentation, I normally have a slide of a bunch of fans at the Eagles game in the stadium, and they're all wearing their Eagles gear, and you can see them cheering and rooting, and they're loving each other, and this is great. And they have this affinity, and the unconscious bias is the guy in the Eagles hat next to me is a good guy because he's in an Eagles hat next to me in the Eagles stadium. It's an affinity, a liking someone or something because it's similar to what you are, okay? Ageism, just what it sounds like. When we have a bias against someone, and that can be, we think the person is too old for the job, or ageism can often be, we think the person is too young for the job. But again, an unconscious decision, way that we're making our decisions, which is not based necessarily on who's got the talent or who should have the job. Attribution. The example I like to use of this is if I have a particular bias about kids, you know, 20, 30-year-olds and their cell phones, and they'll be standing next to each other and they'll send a message to each other. I'll make the statement basically, these kids, the only way they communicate is via their cell phones, and they'll do it. And I'll say, see, I told you, that's the only way that they do it. That's it. So I'm attributing a particular behavior to them, which actually could only be used once, or only just by accident is something that I've encountered. But I'm now attributing this particular practice or habit to all these people of a particular age, just because I've seen it once, and I'm now saying that they all do it, which again is not, it's unconscious and arguably unfair. Unconscious bias, beauty. I'm sure we've all heard that the more attractive people get the better jobs. Unconscious bias, or just looking at someone and thinking that they should be part of your organization because they look good. Conformity, that's sort of similar to affinity. It's when you feel that someone has, you have a group of people and a particular opinion is being voiced, and people, like through peer pressure, conform to the particular thought that's being espoused, when it's really not necessarily something that they would be thinking of themselves. So it's an unconscious process of taking on the attributes of the group, conforming to the groupthink, basically. The contrast effect. It's a situation where you have one person in a group who might be saying yes when everyone else is saying no. And the decision maker about that person can either be attracted to that contrasting person because the decision maker actually likes it when someone stands out and is different, or unconsciously actively dislikes that person because they're standing out and they're different. But we don't know. You know, we don't know whether that's something that we like or not. It might be something that we react to. Gender bias, just what it sounds like. We think that men are smarter. We think that women are more nurturing. We think whatever we think in terms of that bias, and we carry that into our decision making. The halo horns effect. You can have a situation where someone comes into a job and does something that is absolutely wonderful, and everyone appreciates it and they think it's terrific. And so for the rest of that person's tenure, they basically have a halo around them, and they're not doing anything wrong. It's just they were lucky enough or skilled enough or talented enough to have that first impact as a positive, and that follows them along, and people aren't even thinking about why they think Fred is just the greatest. They just think Fred is the greatest. And it's a consequence of that initial action that they took or project that they completed, which gives them the halo. And the opposite of that is the horns. How often someone can do something in an organization which is negative, and it can be one incident, but if it's strong enough and big enough, it's the kind of thing that can follow someone throughout their career. So it can be problematic for them. And again, people don't know why they don't like Fred, but they don't like Fred, unconsciously making those decisions. The name unconscious bias, it happens often when resumes are being reviewed, and names with people's that can reflect particular ethnicities can make the decision maker lean toward or away from a particular resume. What's recommended now, and is done frequently in cases, is that the resumes have had the names eliminated, so that the only thing that the decision maker is making his or her their decision on is what's contained in the resume or in the bio of the person who's applying for the job, not based on their name, which can be problematic. And then finally, again, back to weight. And I think that we say weight twice because it really is an issue. And when we get people to honestly admit that they have a problem with other people's weight, if the other people are too heavy, it's something that absolutely impacts promotion. It impacts hiring. It impacts friendships. It's a really powerful way of discriminating against people, and often unconsciously, it's just a matter of stopping and saying, is this coloring my decision? Is this what's going on? So I'm going to just pause for a second and ask if anyone had any particular one of these types of unconscious bias that they've encountered in their and again, since it's impossible for us to see it on our own, to see situations where other people where the ageism or beauty name have come into play in your workplace or in your experience.
I think gender bias is one that's pretty easy to see. Going into a store, if I go in with my wife and the salesperson talks to me because they think I'm the one who's going to make the decision, when I can tell you I will not be the one making the decision. I think that's one way it shows up.
Right. Anyone else? I'll just share an ageism story. It came out of a class that I was teaching. A woman was talking about her husband who had retired, and he was trying to get back into the workforce. And he went online to apply for a job. And he fills out all the information. He gets to the part about age, and the age is done by 25 to 35, 35 to 45, And he goes up to where his age should be, and it's not there. And he thought, oh, well, I guess this part of the process is broken or something's wrong. I want to call the company and find out what I should do about this, because it doesn't contain my age. So we called them up and explained the problem with the application. And they said, oh, no, that's not a problem. We just don't want anybody as old as you to apply for this job. Right. And when I tell that story, I can feel all the HR people just shaking in their boots. But true story. Ageism, we don't want anybody over the age of 45 or whatever it is. So anyway, all different kinds of unconscious biases. Zoe, next slide, please. So unconscious bias is, quote, in play. And this, it covers virtually everything. Here we say, like, all relationships, all social interactions, all assumptions, thinking, analysis, decision-making. And then everything formal and informal at work or at home that we do. And that's because, again, this unconscious bias is that part of 95% of our thinking that's automatic. It comes from our initial inclination as animals to fight, flight, or freeze. And we had to decide really quickly which of those three things we were going to do if we were going to survive the saber-toothed tiger. So that's why our brains first became accustomed to making these rapid decisions. And we're holding on to that in terms of a lot of our processing information that we encounter in the daily world. And the truth of the matter is, unconscious bias isn't always bad. I mean, it's something that actually allows us to make decisions and to not be frozen in place, and to assess, is this a place where I should be walking? Is this a situation where I should find myself? It's not necessarily bad. It's just when it seeps into our decision-making processes where we don't want it to be there and nonetheless it's there, that's when it's problematic. Next slide. So unconscious bias can lead to microaggressions. And let me just read a definition of microaggression for you before we do these videos. A microaggression is a statement, action, or incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as a racial or ethnic minority. I know that the term microaggression gets thrown around a lot, but I thought it would be good for us just to have a definition before we took a look at this. And the quote in the middle there, that these microaggressions are invisible but potentially lethal. And it compares the insults to carbon monoxide. You can't see it, and then all of a sudden you've got a death on your hands. Something terrible has happened as a consequence of these actions. So we've got two videos. Zoe, if we can start with the "Where are you from?" And we can talk about it afterward.
Hi there.
Hi.
Can you hear it now?
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Yeah. Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Top of the morning to you. Let's get a small tea. Double, toil and trouble. Mind the gap! Beware Jack the Ripper! Bloody hell! Pip pip! Cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
Thanks, Zoe. I have to admit, every time I see that, I laugh. I don't know whether that's appropriate or inappropriate, but it really makes me laugh. It's really sad and it's exaggerated, but there's enough truth to it that makes me sad enough to laugh. So Zoe, how about the next video?
for people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem.
Oh, you're so well spoken.
Just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while,
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland?
sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date,
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
going grocery shopping,
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
commuting to work,
So when are you gonna have a baby?
watching TV,
We have to keep the Redskins name. It's part of our culture and history.
or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
Do you know John? Give me shopping advice.
I love Cher too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every day,
Can I touch your hair?
multiple times a day,
Pretty. Can
Can I touch it,
hair?
please?
Can I please?
is annoying and makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes, which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares?
Just another angry black woman.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try less challenging, Major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
He looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
Again, thanks, Zoe. Anyone have any comments about the videos, either one, the where you're from or the mosquito bite?
They're really great illustrations of microaggressions. And I think all the time it would be great if more people could react like the Asian woman on the running trail.
Right, right.
You know,
Anybody else?
Well, I think it goes to show that it's not just what is said, it's the frequency. And that it takes a toll.
It really does. And it was interesting because when I first watched the mosquito bite, it articulated so well what had been so problematic to me was just after a while, it's absolutely exhausting. You know, once or twice, okay, but the third, fourth, fifth, 20th time, it's just, you know what, this is making me crazy. And the person who said it, again, doesn't know that that's what they were saying to me, or they didn't know that they were doing. But then now all of a sudden it's my responsibility to say, well, I don't like you to touch my hair because, and, you know, and that's exhausting. So it's problematic. It's good just to raise people's awareness of it. So any other comments about the microaggressions?
I have a comment. I mean, there's no doubt it's there, and I know I have my own unconscious bias now. But where's the line between authentic curiosity and interest in somebody's background, for example, and it being considered like a microaggression?
You know, Ken, I think it's interesting that because that question comes up all the time. And I think it's when the question is, you know, I think your accent is absolutely beautiful. And I'm just really curious. Do you come from Ireland and I hope this isn't an offensive question. I'm just genuinely curious about where you're from. And so to state it in such a way that you're expressing authentically your curiosity, and really often it is to make a deeper dive and to getting to know the other person better, to even say, it's really, I just would like to know you better. And I'm just curious. And if that's offensive, I truly apologize. I don't mean it to be offensive. I'd like to know it if you don't mind telling me. So sometimes it takes a little more conversation. And certainly, and I think that you raised a good point. It's about the attitude that comes off the person. Our gentleman in the "Where Are You From" video
Yeah.
was just, and again, that was exaggerated for the purpose of conversation and discussion. But someone who, the feeling that comes from him is not curiosity. The feeling that comes from him is superiority and and dismissiveness. So I think that's what it can be. Any other questions? Any other comments?
I think that's a great question, because it was surprising to me when I first heard that women of color get sometimes offended when people talk about their hair, want to touch it or whatever. My mother grew up in South Philadelphia, and she had a very dear friend who was of color who used to have the cornrow. And till the day my mother passed away, my mother was fascinated and was jealous that she could not have it. She had very, hair that just wouldn't do it. And so whenever she saw somebody with their hair in a beautiful design, she was truly being warm and almost giving the other person more credit. Like, oh, I wish I could have that. And so the first time that I heard that somebody would find it offensive was so shocking to me, because all my life, my mother wanted it so badly. And so, it makes me wonder sometimes if our own baggage, even when somebody is being nice and supportive and expressing, good things. And I know there's tons of mosquito bites, but sometimes people are bringing flowers or something beautiful, and it gets misinterpreted as well. So how do you know when to react which way? Whose responsibility is it? On lots of issues. I mean, that's just one that, was expressed in the video.
Right. No, and that's a really good point. And I think what I like to think it does, whether it's almost no matter how it starts, it could turn into a conversation. So that if your mother were to say to someone, "Oh, I just love your hair," and the person gets offended, said, No, I didn't mean that offensively. I truly love your hair. I've always wanted to be able to do my hair like that. I mean, and then all of a sudden that can lead to the conversation, which makes the other person realize, you know what, this is a nice woman who was really, truly intrigued by my hair. And I wore my hair. My feeling too is like, if you're wearing your hair in an exotic way, you're sort of saying, look at me. Right. I feel that with a lot of ways that we present ourselves. It's sort of, and I'm often a mosquito bite, because I want to know, so where'd you get this, or what inspired this? And it's just an authentic question. I certainly don't mean to offend by it. So hopefully it leads to a conversation, which makes things clearer. But it takes it. All of these things take effort. Conversations about biases, diversity, inclusion, microaggressions, they all take effort. And that's just, I think, the fact of the matter about them. And that's why I'm so grateful that you're all here, because this is part of the beginning of the awareness and about the conversation. So I think it's extremely helpful. Zoe, can you take us to the next slide? Because I realize we're running low on time. So how does unconscious bias impact all of us? And here's a list. And it's true that what we know is that it can negatively impact innovation and profitability, leads to misunderstandings and fosters stereotyping. And I know I said that we would talk about stereotyping. That's a huge topic in and of itself. But the idea is that stereotyping is not a positive thing. And it's something that we need to work against and avoid. The unconscious bias has an adverse impact to society, drives low morale and self-esteem, leads to a divisive culture, contributes to poor diversity and inclusion levels, and stifles engagement and productivity. So it's a negative for all of us in so many ways. So we need to, I like the fact we're having this conversation so that we can just raise our awareness and ask people around us to help us be aware, which I think brings us to the next slide, Zoe, if you would. Right, what can we do about it? We can become aware. And we do that by literally asking people around us, especially when we're in these decision-making processes with people, to say, you know, I had a great interview with Lisa, and I think it's because I think she's really the most talented person for the job. Is there any way you think that I like Lisa because she's a Black woman? You know, and I relate to her? Is that, I mean, have those around us help us become aware of what might be our biases. But that's, again, we leave ourselves open to conversation and criticism necessarily, which leaves us vulnerable. But it's a way to have that unconscious bias start to be revealed to us. And once it's revealed to us, and once we've identified unconscious bias, then we're less likely to engage in it. We still can fall back into it, but if we know, or I'll say to myself, boy, and this is true, this is an unconscious bias of mine. I have a particular affinity for little African-American boys. I want them to be little, I want them to be African-American, and they just can wrap me around their finger. I don't know what it is, but it's an unconscious bias that I have. And I became aware of it when I was a summer sub at a daycare. And I realized, oh my gosh, I'm absolutely treating this pack of boys differently in a positive way, but nonetheless, it was still differently. And it was an unconscious bias of mine. And once I did, that stopped me. Every time I had an interaction with one of these boys, I'd stop and think, is it really fair? Am I doing the right thing? Okay, so speak up. And this is another challenging thing that we try to do. If you can perceive that someone is making a decision based on an unconscious bias, be bold. Speak up and tell the person that that's what you think that you're seeing. That's also like making the invisible visible. It's helping each other to be aware of what our biases might be. Because again, we cannot find them out ourselves. So speaking up, it's a brave, bold thing, but necessary. And making the invisible visible, helping each other with discovering what our unconscious biases might be. And then finally, the share resources. And I don't know if you can see the link there, but it's a test by Harvard. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it allows you to look at people's faces, a rapid succession of photos, and it'll get you to the end and let you know what kind of groups of people you might have biases against. I think it's like a 10-minute test. It's pretty straightforward and pretty powerful. And you can find out things about yourself or not that impact your unconscious bias and your decision making. So next slide, Zoe.
Karen?
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? In terms of speaking up, for me personally, it's much easier to speak up to a person, whether I know them or they're a stranger, if I observe them saying something or implying something or saying something to me about other people because I'm white and they're white and they think that I would agree with them. But when recently I've been in several situations where someone in the group in discussion without prompting says, I really have to be careful about what I say because I don't want to say anything that's going to offend someone. And then someone else chimes in, yeah, I know it's really hard. We have to be politically correct. Right. And so they haven't actually made a discriminatory comment. And I'm finding myself, because I don't necessarily think they're bad people,
sure,
but I would like to bring it up to them that just saying that implies something. And I've been grappling with this a little bit because I cringe when it happens. And when it happens, it's one thing in a small group, but when it happens in front of a larger group of people, I really, I get feeling like, well, you're representing, something about this whole group that's in this webinar or in this workshop. And I keep thinking I should reach out individually,
Right.
but I really just don't know. I've been racking my brain about this for the last couple of weeks. What's the entree to bring this up? So I don't know if you have a thought about that kind of speaking up.
Well, and I kind of do. I like to speak up when I feel like it's actually going to make a difference. And I'm envisioning like a large group of people. If you tried to raise it there, the person can become extremely defensive and hostile. And all of a sudden your message is completely lost and the situation develops. But my thought is if you could talk to the person just separately, and if you have a personal relationship with them or even not, say, I just wanted to react to something you said. I just took this unconscious bias class, and I think I'm learning some things about ways that we behave that are impactful and that cause that warrant some discussion among people. And the other day when you said blah 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 blah, it made me stop and think, and I wanted to just discuss that with you and understand what you were trying to say about that. I mean, so do you get them like to start talking about what their position is on it? And from I'm curious because I'm learning about this, and this struck me as being something that could be problematic. Can we talk about it? Again, sort of starting the conversation with someone else. So, and I try so hard to make sure that people don't get defensive, and it's such an easy topic for people to get defensive about. But what I can say, Leslie, is what I say to my white friends all the time is, I really feel like it's important that we all speak up, but sometimes just because you're a white person, your comments to your colleagues, your other white colleagues, will be taken more seriously. And it won't just be, oh, well, she's a Black woman, she had to tell me that. They'll say, well, Leslie said, and I know Leslie, and she's thoughtful, and she's, again, they've got a bias about you that's going on, but that allows you to get in there and have some influence on how they're thinking and whether they'll think the next time before they say that, whether they'll stop and think, even if you didn't give them the answer, maybe I shouldn't be saying this. And not because it's not politically correct, but because there is a different way of thinking about this.
Right. Thank you. That's helpful, because I think when they say that, they're already in a position of being defensive.
Right.
If I'm sharing that I'm afraid to say something, or I don't know what to say, or I'm always worried that, I'm going to offend someone who's the other.
Right.
I guess part of what I struggle with is, all right, they're already in that defensive posture.
Right.
How do I, sort of break that down without having them be more defensive? But that was very helpful. Thank you.
Good. Any other comments before we go on to taking a look at this, and I'll put it in quote, pledge? This pledge was put together by the Education Subcommittee of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And it's not something that we're looking for you to sign and swear to, but it's more to give you points to take a look at and say, am I able to basically try to commit to this in my experience inside of Beacon and outside of Beacon. And what we'll do, Zoe, is I think the deck will be available so that if people want to come back and take a look at this and to see whether it's something that appeals to them in terms of ways that they would like to conduct themselves. I think it's good guidance, and it's fairly, fairly gentle. And again, the committee pulled it together because they wanted to have something of a thoughtful kind of arguably action point to wrap the presentation up with. So
this
yeah.
is wonderful. This is wonderful. I think it should be something that is given to all members to
Right.
really take a view at with some explanation. And whether people sign in data, however, I don't know how far you want to take it,
Mhm.
but I think that I would encourage further integration within Beacon.
Oh, good. Okay. Any other comments, thoughts?
I have a comment, actually. So for number 4, I think one of the problems we have in our society is that we are pretty segregated. I mean, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, oftentimes, I'm at a meeting and I see maybe a couple of people of color, but it's often more white people. It's unfortunate that that's the way it is right now. So how do you invite someone, a person of color, without making them feel like that there's implicit bias there, right? It's like, oh, you know what? We could use a African-American person in Beacon. Why don't you come over? I mean, I obviously we need to be genuine about it, but I think that's a tricky, I don't know. I think it's, on one hand, we know it's the right thing to do. On the other hand, we don't want to do it in a way that does show bias.
Sure. Right. Well, I would think that if you had someone who you thought would be a great Beacon member and it turns out that they're African-American, great. Like, what could be better? Because you really are inviting them primarily because you think that Beacon would be good for them. And I think that Beacon would be good for so many people. That would be terrific. What the actively diversifying the networks is, when I read that, I think about getting into situations where if you find yourself in a position where you are introduced to someone who's a person of color, and then ask questions about them and find out, would they possibly have an interest in Beacon, right? And that brings it back around to primary issue here is this person really would be interested in Beacon. We're not trying to get people to be stereotypes or be tokens or anything like that. What we want people who really would be good Beacon candidates regardless, but have ourselves aware of the fact that we are looking to diversify Beacon, and that's a point that I think we all have to work at, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, seeing people of color and thinking, oh, this could be a good Beacon candidate. Let's talk to him or her or them and find out if they might be, and in which case, great, invite them and encourage them. And frankly say, Beacon's not the most diverse network of people that we're going to encounter, just to give you a heads up. But it'd be lovely if you would come and check us out and spend some time with us. Mm-hmm. So that's just a thought.
Can we dig into that some more, maybe from an adjacent sort of way? So this is kind of the second session like this where I've attended today, which has kind of touched on some of these issues. And so just to set the scene, I own a small business. We're in the tech space, which is got a horrible reputation, and actually, it's not diverse at all. It's not diverse from an ethnic standpoint, and it's not very diverse from an agenda basis either. And I would love to figure out how to kind of make changes in that. Mm-hmm. But put that in juxtaposition that to do that, I need to bring people on. Like, I'm looking for resources, like a lot of businesses are at the moment. And so then I'm left with this. If I focus just purely on they qualify 100% as a candidate for what my business needs technically, I'm just going to perpetuate the same lack of inclusion. Do you know what I mean? And I wonder, and maybe this is way more challenging than this group, but I wonder what there is from opening up a kind of or relaxing our constraints, back to the beacon on like relaxing our constraints on who potential members are, so we can have a more diverse community, and whether that makes sense, whether it's logical, or whether we need to fix this at a kind of broader, higher level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense, Ben. I hear you like 100%. And my first thought is, I hear your concern, and I'll call it a complaint, that you're not finding enough qualified candidates for your tech industry. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. That's
right.
true.
Right. And I hear that all the time as a DE&I consultant. And then I make it my job to figure out where these individuals are, and to set up pipelines for people, and to be able to say, you know what, you thought that there weren't that this group of candidates wasn't out there, but they actually were. We just didn't know exactly where to look. You didn't know exactly where to look for them. I help you find them. And that's not a pitch for my business. I'm just saying, there often people, it feels like it's a heavier lift. And it's not necessarily a light lift, but it seems like an impossible lift when all it really is a slightly heavier lift, just to figure out like where do we find these people? Do we make the connections in high schools and sort of like promote through college, or do we grab them in college and sort of, do we go to HBCUs, the historically Black colleges, or do we sort of, where do we find people to feed into this particular network? And it takes work. I mean, it takes focus, but it really can be done. I'm confident that these candidates are out there. But to your second point about relaxing the beacon requirements, I'm in another organization which recently did decide to change its requirements to cast a wider net, because we were really aware of the fact that based on how we were structured, we were necessarily cutting out a whole segment of the population, which if all we did was say, and this was particularly, it was a financial requirement, we sort of relaxed that. And all of a sudden that opened us up to this completely new group of candidates for our organization. But it was a decision that had to come from the top. It was a decision where it was like consciously decided, okay, like how are we going to change our requirements? And we didn't necessarily see as relaxed, but because what's implied in that, but just to say, how are we going to change them so that we have we're open to a more diverse population? But I agree with you. I know exactly what you're saying, and I've seen that in action where it's been done.
And I, being on the membership committee, one of the things I'm going to encourage you, Ben, to do, and others as well, is to go on our website and take a look at the criteria to become a Beacon member, because it is pretty darn broad. And I don't think, and I think that it wasn't, and previously it wasn't. And somehow that has gotten ingrained that's what it is, that you have to be a senior person, you have to be like the owner of a company, whatever. And if you go and take a look at what the actual requirement is, you will see that it is far broader, and it brings it down to people who are up and comers, that still have relationship to senior people, but it truly does bring who could be a Beacon member. It has extended that substantially. So I think that's something we probably need to do, is to make sure that our members understand that we have really, it is rather broad.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing my attention to that, Barbara, because I hadn't recognized, and I guess I've not gone to the Beacon website kind of looking for that. So,
sure. And you're not why would you?
Well, I guess, and you bringing it up is awesome, because that allows me to share that with others as well, because you're right, we're not going to change unless we socialize these things. So so that's useful for me to know, because I think we can tap back to Karen's point. I think we can tap into other kind of networks. Like just recently I went through the Goldman Sachs 10,000 small businesses, and that has a much diverser community that I think we could tap into. But I think some of them wouldn't have originally fitted some of the criteria to some degree. And so now, like if maybe they do, and I think that would be a good thing.
Oh,
yeah. I'll go and take a look. Thank you.
And I just want to say, I haven't looked at the criteria for a very long time. And so while I was listening, I love the fact that it's not only broader in levels, but it talks about the values that are important. And I think that when you reach out to members, that should be what comes first, is what kind of human being they are. Then we can worry about diversity of color, race, gender, sexual orientation, whatever we want to do. Because I think people feel bad when they think the only reason they're included is because they check off a box, and I think that is more demeaning to the individual than excluding them, because it's saying we're not really interested in you, but we don't have any people in this age group, we don't have any technical people, we don't have people of color, we don't have people from outside the country, and so I love, and I can't remember the last time I looked at the criteria, probably when I joined Beacon. And so Barbara, thank you for raising that we should all go back and double check how it has changed, and how, we talk about generosity of spirit. And I think that's what should attract people. And I think it's wonderful. So job well done.
I thank you for raising it as well, Barbara, but I just hopped onto the website to check it. And maybe we need to do some more work, because Beacon, under the Beacon and its membership and its benefits page, the first sentence is Beacon is a group of C-level professionals who work with C-level executives establishing and implementing strategies. And that just says, if I'm not in the C-suite or talking to the C-suite, I don't count.
Well, and I want to be careful here, because I don't want to sideline the discussion from where this needs to be, but I'll be more than happy to Ben to have one-on-one with you and to talk with you further, and anyone else who wants to do that as well. I mean, this is a state of flux. We can always look at things that make things more clear, but Karen, I want to make sure that we're not taking away from your presentation.
Great, thanks, Barbara. I think we're about to wrap up. Zoe, did we time out on our?
No, I just thought there was so much going on that people want to see each other. And I could only see like one person at a time. So I just stopped to share. I can share it again.
Okay, I think we're at the end.
Yeah, I have a point which is not related to a business situation, but I actually had to turn a man down the other day because he wasn't old enough. And I don't think he's heard that in a while.
Right. Okay. Oh, great. So we're at the end of our presentation. We are certainly at our hour. Again, we will make the deck available, accessible to people. So if you want to go to the deck and link these post-presentation opportunities, we recommend them to you. So again, I really want to say thank you to everyone for coming tonight, and thank you for your participation and your attention. It's really appreciated, and happy to have started this conversation about unconscious bias with you, and hope that we can continue to carry it forward throughout Beacon and throughout the rest of our lives as well. So thank you very much, everyone.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.